I will say without shame, it is entirely true that I asked ChatGPT to write an introductory line for this panel, and it said, "Our next session takes us into the world of artificial intelligence. As AI shapes elections, warfare, and even spiritual life, who decides the ethical guardrails?" Moderator, NPR Jason's DeRose, will guide this conversation with Dr. Aaron Dominguez and Haley Grese. Please welcome our panel.
None of what I have to say did I ask ChatGPT to write for me, because I actually enjoy writing. I want to start with a few passages from a Vatican document released earlier this year called Antiqua et Nova, Old and New, a note on the relationship between artificial intelligence and human intelligence. And these are three short passages from the section called Relationality. Human intelligence is not an isolated faculty, but is exercised in relationships, in finding its fullest expression in dialogue, collaboration, and solidarity. We learn with others, and we learn through others. And a bit later, Christians are also called to imitate Christ's outpouring gift by following his command to love one another as I have loved you. And finally, even more sublime than knowing many things is the commitment to care for one another. For if I understand all mysteries and all knowledge, but do not have love, I am nothing. I commend this document to you. I don't generally just suggest reading 170 paragraph documents from the Vatican, but it is a really beautifully written document, and I suggest that you read it. Well, I wanted to just put that out there. I often, when I teach, I often start with a poem, and I thought that was the closest thing to a poem I was going to get to today. So I'd like to start, and this question is for each of you. Haley, let's start with you. How do you see formal religious institutions creating or avoiding talking about frameworks for thinking about AI?
Well, hello, everyone. Thank you so much for having me. I'm delighted to be in conversation with you both and with all of you, and thank you to RNS. So I'm here as a former co-editor for the organization AI and Faith, which was founded in 2018 on the belief that faith-based ethics have something to add to the AI conversation. And it's a pluralist organization, one which I joined in 2022, and of course later that year in November, ChatGPT was unleashed on the public. And as far as religious institutions speaking to AI and ethics in the AI conversation, I think something important to keep in mind, which is informed by my doctoral work, which focuses on philosophy of religion and technology, is that secularism and the notion that ChatGPT is somehow lacking any form of religious affiliation is already troubled. So then we're seeing, I hope later in the conversation we'll get further into Magisterium.ai or other specifically faith-based AI tools. And I think that's an interesting way in which we have seen religious institutions or groups try to address the lack of, or the perceived lack of religion in these spaces. But I think that there's certainly interest, and this conversation is fast-moving. And in 2022, when we were doing editorial work at AI and Faith, it seemed there was a paucity of articles that were addressing that specific nexus of the relationship between faith and AI. But now it feels that that conversation, I mean, this event is a testament to how much it has expanded and how much interest there is in that intersection.
And Aaron, how do you see institutions responding?
Yeah, I think it's, if you look at the Catholic Church's response, it's been pretty rapid and broad. And that Antiqua Nova document from Pope is something that my faculty read. So for the first 5 years of their time as new faculty members at Catholic University, we get together like this and we pray, we have lunch, and then we do a close reading of some text related to education or Catholic education, and now they're reading Antiqua Nova together. And it's informing their view of being professors at Catholic University. So we're trying to just deeply integrate, this moment in time responding to this moment in time from the framework of our Catholic faith. And you mentioned Magisterium.ai. The founder of that is Matthew Sanders, a former seminarian, and he hosted an AI conference at the Vatican last year in November, which I took part in. And it was fascinating because it was a room full of about 80 people, all of them Catholic, all of them at the top of their field, tech entrepreneurs, venture capitalists, hackers, some professors, all talking about, what is the Catholic Church's response to this? So for us, I think there's some high-level observations. The Catholic Church has been thinking about what it means to be a human being for a long time. And I think whenever my friends outside of the church struggle with, the simulation, telling the difference between the simulation and the human being, like this ChatGPT thing, how do I tell it's not alive or it's not a person? The problem is that they don't understand what a person is. It's not that the machine is mimicking it. They don't know the difference between a machine and a person. A person experiences things. A person, like we heard in the video, can love, experience grief, sorrow, and you want to get to know the person by understanding what it is that they've encountered in their life. That's how you engage with people. That's how you get to know somebody or love them. Your artificial girlfriend ChatGPT can't do that. It can never do that for you.
But it can simulate it.
It can simulate parts of it. It can certainly simulate parts of it, but it can't have a history and a life with you like you could. Getting to know Haley here, I now know something about her. She went to Sacred Heart School in Bellevue, Washington, and she experienced the Catholic education there, not as a Catholic girl, but it formed her, I think. I think your Catholic education there changed the way that you encounter technology, didn't it?
I would certainly say so, even though I decided to go to a college that expressly did not have a religious affiliation, and then found myself majoring in religion, and over a decade later, I'm now pursuing my PhD in the subject. But Dr. Dominguez, I want to return to your question about what it means to be human. And especially when AI, chatbots, and generated AI can do such sophisticated mimicry. And we see people forming relationships with these chatbots. So there is something that is speaking to them, even while the AI itself is lacking consciousness, biological form, the ability to have experiences. There's still this mimicry happening. And then also the example of artificial intelligence, AAI, where human laborers are hired to replace computers for tasks that humans are better at. So sometimes some of the chat services on help websites that you may be using are humans posing as computers. And the way in which technology and AI, but also sometimes humans masquerading as technology, confuses and now mediates our relationships, I think ushers in a really new era that has new ethical concerns and issues. Because if there's not a transparency there about what are the mechanics, what is the type of system that I'm interacting with? Is it another human? That really puts a finer point on questions of personhood that have, yes, been debated for millennia, but with these new technologies, a whole host of other moral and ethical issues comes in when you don't know what is the system you're interacting with.
And quite often, it's not either an AI or a human, but it is both at the same time. Many chatbots work that way. It will begin as an AI that is kicked to a human at some point and then kicked back to a chatbot at some point.
Yeah. So do you want me to talk about the 3 pillars?
Sure. Well,
or do you want to keep going on?
We can. When you get the more practicality section, we're sort of dividing this conversation between the philosophical and the practical, and I'm going to get to some practical considerations for how to address this. But I wonder, what do each of you think religious institutions or people of faith bring to the conversation that is left out of the conversation in the secular world?
Haley, you want to start?
Sure, I can go ahead on that. I think, first of all, bringing people into the conversation is hugely important, because when we're asking the question of who is speaking for morality and ethics in AI, largely we see corporations, and it's hard to get an answer to that question of where are these morals coming from. So the fact that we're seeing, I think, more religious institutions and groups be interested in this conversation gives me some hope for the more democratic management of AI, which is an ideal that I think would be honorable to aim towards. And I don't mean necessarily state-managed AI, but I mean more people who are affected being involved, because this AI issues are not a private affair. I mean, these technologies are enacted on the public.
How would you imagine that happening? How would more people become involved?
One example would be labor unions. So in 2023, with the Writers Guild of America strike, we saw creatives demanding that their work not be replaced by AI. And the outcome of that strike was, in part, the definition in their collective bargaining agreement, so in their legally binding contract, that AI is not a writer and its output is not considered literary material. So that's one specific example where we see personhood being meted out and defined in a very particular context. So I think unions can be one place of making the conversation more democratic, but also religious institutions, and some push against this assumption that AI is non-religious, and that the non-religious is then indexed the universal, and that is the default, and religious consciousness and faith is somehow aberrant of that default.
I'd like to get this response from each of you. One of the biggest concerns that I have seen in reading around this is that how AI either is or is not attentive to human dignity. And much of things old and new is about what is human dignity and how to attend to that. So how do you see AI either attending to or not attending to human dignity?
Well, I mean, from the Catholic perspective, our understanding of a person is that we're made by a loving Creator in His image and likeness, that He loves us, and He has a purpose for us. He has a plan for us. So that, and every person has an infinite dignity and worth that's given to them by our Creator, and not other people, or not the laws, or not the state. The AI is a tool made by people, and it's a super sophisticated tool, but it's something artificially created by people to get something done, right? Like a knife can be used to cut your steak or to kill somebody. It's a tool that can be used. So I think it's, again, where's the human person in this is what I always ask. Like, where's the person in this relationship? And what's the purpose of this relationship? It should be to serve something good about the person. So that's the perspective that I think faith-based institutions can give. And I can't speak authoritatively of non-Catholic ones, but I know pretty well what's going on inside the Catholic version of that.
And Haley, how do you think AI can or should attend to human dignity?
I think that needs to be analyzed in each particular application. So at a time where we're seeing ICE agents covering their faces and Clearview AI contracting with police departments and social media of immigrants being monitored, those to me do not seem like democratic uses of AI, because those on which it's being enacted largely do not have a choice in the way in which they're being surveilled. But then there are protein sequencing discoveries that AI can certainly support and that could advance healthcare. So I hesitate to say, give a blanket statement on whether or not AI can promote human dignity, and I think this relates to Professor Glaud's opening remarks about our role in promoting democracy, trying to strive for a democratic use and control of AI.
I'll circle back to my first question then. Do you see religious institutions, when a religious institution puts out a document about AI, do you think that actually changes the way that the people developing AI think about what they're doing, or does it suggest to the people using it how they might think about using it?
I would hope it has some impact. There's a lot of smart people who've been in the Catholic Church, serious thinkers for thousands of years. They've got something important to say, even if you're not a Catholic. And so you look towards, you look to thinkers, you look to people who've thought through these kinds of hard problems. So, and there's plenty of people looking for meaning, or who are struggling to find meaning or answers. And the Facebook story that is basically designed to harm people, right? I don't know that was intentional, but they didn't think through, I don't think, to benefit of the doubt, being charitable, I don't think they thought through the impact that they would have, I think, uncovered if they had been thinking from a lens of a faith-based perspective. So I do hope that we have something to say that guides the world.
Haley, do you see anybody doing it well?
Doing it well in terms of?
Creating institutional ways of thinking that attend to human dignity.
That's a big one. Maybe we can come back to that question.
Sure.
I'll ruminate on it.
Well, I want to talk a little bit about the practicalities of how faith groups and religious institutions interact with AI. And Aaron, I know that we talked about how Catholic University has created a series of pillars that are ways to think about how to use or not use AI. So maybe you could describe those, and then in about 10 or 12 minutes, we're going to come to audience questions. So start to think about your questions, perhaps practical questions that we might bring to the panel.
Yeah, thank you. So there's been some thinking on this from me and my friends for the past year. I mentioned Matthew Sanders, the founder of Longbeard and Magisterium.ai, hosted a conference a year ago in the Vatican, and we're going back there at the end of this month. And so it's been about a year-long process of how do we approach AI as a Catholic university? How do we do it? Because it's not going away. And I've got some faculty members, they're mainly philosophers and historians, who want to ban it from campus, but that's just not going to happen. We have to figure out how to use this for good. So again, it comes back, what is a person? What's the nature of this relationship? And we conceive of this interaction, of these interactions we're talking about, as a human-machine team, like a machine and a human being working together towards some end, but it has to be properly ordered. The human being has to be at the center of the team. It has to be the central character in this interaction, and not vice versa. There's a distinct order to this relationship, and that's because the human person has this infinite dignity made in the image likeness of God, and this machine is a tool being used by the human person. So that's number one, to help you think of what's the order of this relationship and what is it for. Number two is that this interaction should at least open up the possibility for the human person to flourish. to grow in virtue, for something good to come out of it for the human being. And the reverse should be strictly avoided. You shouldn't design this interaction to intentionally harm or open up a large window for vice for the human being. It should be the exact opposite. And there's plenty of examples of, probably more examples of the vicious cycle, like an artificial girlfriend. That's just not going to help a young man flourish. It's going to be harmful. It will lead him astray, and he will not grow. He will not learn how to love. Now, on the other side is, there could be an app that brings us together, and that's the third design principle: is that the purpose of this interaction, using this technology, should in fact be an authentic human interaction, like we're having here. We're using tech, to run the show here, but what we're really having is an authentic human interaction, me and you and Haley. And that's an important thing to realize. Watching the podcast afterwards it's not as good. I mean, we're going to do it, but it's this thing that we're having right now in real time is important. So using these tools should lead to an authentic human encounter, either person to person, person to God, like it should lead you to truly pray, or to have an internal self-reflection that's meaningful. So those are the design principles we're using when thinking of how do we deploy AI at Catholic University.
So Haley, when you hear those pillars, do you want to pick one or two to respond to? How do you think about those?
I think that one of the most important points about humans being in charge of AI, leading the conversation, and having autonomy over themselves and also the technology, I fear that the waters have already been muddied. And when we're interacting with chatbots where artist content, the intellectual output of thinkers has been ingested and then revivified and produced as a product by the AI, that, to me, feels like you are in conversation with specific people, with specific sets of morals. And what feels lacking there, in my view, is a politics of citation. It's much more difficult to see where are the morals coming from that you're engaging with. And to return to your question about human dignity, I think an important point for growing intellectually, and this is me speaking as an academic, is criticism. And that doesn't necessarily, and critique. So being able to think critically. Whereas where we see a mirroring of values, that to me lacks criticism, but it also lacks grounding in any particular, it can lack grounding in any particular tradition. So if you are, for example, I've asked ChatGPT, what are appropriate forms of protest? And the answers I get are very, at the right time and place, you may engage in symbolic acts of dissent. But then when I ask what are radical forms of protest, I get a very different answer that includes labor strikes, that includes more radical forms of protest that I feel is drawing on the Black radical tradition, that is drawing on the labor movement. So those are very different moral strains and ethical traditions, and yet there's not an easy way to see where those morals are coming from, or even that there are morals being reflected back at me that are already latent in my question. And as far as politics of citation, a more practical way that could look, thinking about my role as a teaching fellow at Harvard right now and the role of AI in education, one of the ways to do that is asking students to provide an addendum to assignments. There's no good way to cite ChatGPT at this point in time, even though we know many of our students are using it for their work. And the use of AI does not necessarily mean that it is unethical, but it's more about the way in which this tool is used. So if students are asked to describe the way in which they have used this tool, I mean, did it just spit out your whole essay and you edited a few paragraphs to make it look like it was your own? Or are you using it to say, what are this thinker's major works and which ones might be most relevant for me to read? I mean, those have very different, I think, ethical commitments in terms of how it's used, and asking for students to reflect on the way in which it's used can be a way to start having healthy critical thinking about what these tools are doing for us. So as far as to return to Dr. Dominguez's ideal about the human being in control, I think it's more, the ideal should perhaps be one about what is having a critical relationship with AI, and how do we articulate that and keep renegotiating that.
Yeah, I think you're right there. How do you know that the AI is giving you something that's true or false? You know that because you interact with other people, or you've learned something previously. So again, it has to lead to, like, if our students are using ChatGPT or Gemini to help them write their term paper, you have to haul them into class and have an honest to goodness Socratic discussion with them and quiz them on stuff and tell me, how did you come to this conclusion? What are you thinking? What is this? What's the meaning of this? You have to dig into the person, and then that becomes a powerful research tool. But you're right. If it just spits out their term paper and you press send, then there's nothing. And then why doesn't the professor just grade the paper with ChatGPT and be done with it? So it's got to be. You have to find the person. You have to dig it out of them, I think.
And one of the projects we worked on at AI and Faith was compiling an article called Technical and Religious Perspectives on AI Misinformation and Disinformation, which really took up the widespread issue of misinformation and disinformation as a religious issue, as one that faith traditions and people of faith have a particular stake in because of the erosion of truth.
I have one final question for each of you, and then we'll go to audience questions, so start formulating your questions. Since you both teach at universities, I wonder what your interaction with younger generations, the students who are probably in their early 20s, are. How do they think about this, and how are you able to guide them in their thinking about this?
Yeah, they're digital natives in ways that we grew up, with electricity and TVs and stuff, but not with the internet, so to speak. These kids it's all they know is this new landscape, and I think they quickly adopt new technologies, and I think have instantaneously adopted the different AI tools into their lives. I think it's just fully integrated into their lives now. Our job is to help form them as people and to, again, help guide them to make these choices and understand what they're for, what they're for as people, and to use AI as tools to help them grow. So I think they have, they kind of have the same problems that all generations have at that time. It's just a different era now with these tools, and it's a residential campus. It's 50-50 men, women for undergraduates. It's a good time for them to learn how to have relationships, to have true, learn how to go on dates, how to do stuff that's going to be good for them down the road. But they're coming to us for that kind of formation. So I love it. That's why I love working at universities.
And Haley, how are you seeing this shaping and being shaped by your students at Harvard?
I think for many of my students, ChatGPT or other generative AI tools are largely replacing more traditional search engines like Google or DuckDuckGo or what have you. And as I've mentioned, because of this opacity I see with the ability to see what the source is of that information and what are the moral leanings and or political leanings of that source, I feel that with AI it's much harder to perform a genealogy of morals. So I have some reservations about that. And I feel that new techniques of digital literacy will be needed, but by and large I see my students having much more comfort using AI and a bit of a shamelessness. I'm not saying that they should be ashamed, but just willingness to say, oh, I was going back and forth with ChatGPT about this, or ChatGPT told me XYZ. And so I think that level of comfort and ubiquity paired with the lack of a citational convention or politics around how to seat AI-generated content in academic discourse, but also just more broadly in public discourse is an area where we need to explore and figure out how to make that happen in a more democratic way.
Well, thank you so much. I want to turn for the last 15 minutes of this conversation to the audience. I believe that we have microphones, so raise your hand or stand up maybe.
Do you want to remind everybody of the practical part you were saying?
Oh, I'm specifically interested in practical considerations that you might have and that our panel could address, but it doesn't have to totally be practical considerations.
Hi, I'm Phyllis Sagano from Hofstra University, and I write for RNS. I kind of have a comment and a question. The comment is, I've been teaching a long time, so ladies and gentlemen, when you hand in your term paper at the final exam, the last question will be, please write an essay about the paper you just turned in. That generally helps with plagiarism and things like that. Well, my thought really is about autonomous machines. And the relation of us, not to using ChatGPT or the others to create these, but the use that our systems, our government systems, will be having with autonomous machines. I mean, now we know about self-driving taxis, but I'm talking about drones and aircraft that can be guided, but also the prediction is they can be self-guided, and they can make the determination on whether they will shoot or drop a bomb. So I'm asking about the morals of developing these kinds of machines that are autonomous and the trust that systems, governments, may have in the decision-making of these autonomous machines, such as we have the current trust in the self-driving cars.
Yeah, that's a very important question. In fact, 2 years ago when we were moving forward with these AI initiatives at Catholic U and conceiving of a new bachelor's program and master's programs in AI with this ethical framework, the first conference that we hosted was with Leidos, which is a defense contractor. If you don't know who they are, it's a tech company. If you go to the airport now, you'll see Leidos everywhere, because if you didn't know that name, now you'll see it on every scanner. The question was ethical use of AI in warfare. How do you ethically deploy artificial intelligence tools to the warfighter in the appropriate way? And that's a very good question. I don't know that we have it fully figured out, but there has to be a human in the loop. I mean, you can conceive of an army of killer robots, and I think probably our current Secretary of War would love to have some of those. But there has to be a person somewhere that's making these decisions. But it's a tough one. Just an anecdote. Mel Williams was on our board of trustees. He's a 4-star admiral and was a commander of one of the nuclear submarines that can fire interballistic missiles with. So he was an African-American guy. So he was the first black man with nuclear weapons at his disposal. And this was during the time of the Gulf War. And, he deployed some not nuclear tipped warheads, but what he realized was that he was deploying something that's going to go very far away to kill people. And it's like, at some point, it's out of his control. So you have to have a person in there who knows how to wrestle through that. So we have to be forming we have to be forming people like Mel Williams to lead, such that we have some faith that those hard decisions can be made in the heat of battle. But yeah, I'm not in favor of killer robots that are autonomous. I'm not.
We have a question back. Hi, Janae Lewis, Faith and Public Life. Haley, I appreciated what you were saying about the ethics and the morals of the user often being reflected back in the interaction with AI. I'm curious if either of you in your work have talked about the ethics and morals of the creator. So as a Catholic, I believe that as God has given us the Holy Spirit, we also have this power to create and be an extension of his creational power. And so we know already in technology that if a creator of facial recognition technology has a bias against darker skinned people, then the technology tends to reflect that bias. We know that if someone has an ableist bias, then the technology ignores alternate uses. So can you share a little bit about how either of your work is engaging with generators and creators and developers of AI to confront and be honest about their own potential biases or overt discriminatory perspectives that might infuse the use of AI?
Yeah, I can answer this first. This also brings me back to the first question about autonomous machines and automatic targeting systems, because there was an article a few years ago about the moral injury of drone pilots and how even though they were not on the front lines of combat, they were still facing the effects of pressing the button and being responsible for the death of people that they were targeting, even though the technology enabled them to be far away and physically detached from the zone of combat. And I wonder, when something like an automatic targeting system exists, does that work in some way to almost eliminate moral injury? I don't think it eliminates the moral responsibility, but does that allow creators of these types of systems to say, my hands are clean, I do not experience moral injury? And I think that these issues really strain our legal systems and ethical systems when asked, how do you hold, say, a corporation? Because I think that you can't think through the creative processes, who is responsible, without looking at the role of corporations in the production of AI. But how do you hold them accountable, and corporations themselves, they are made up of people. So where does that accountability rest? And especially, our first question brought up the issue of autonomy. I mean, the root of the word autonomy is self and law, so self-governance. And what does it mean to have an AI system that is purportedly self-governing, that is agental in that way, albeit it is not conscious? So it's programmed with specific biases in mind, as you bring up. And one more anecdote, and this is no doubt outdated because of the move fast and break things ethos that governs so much of our technology these days, but I was doing some research with ChatGPT a year or so ago, and I had been asking, I simply asked the question, define genocide. That was a term that was coming up. There was much debate over genocide. What is it? Is it happening in our public discourse then and still today? And ChatGPT said, I'm sorry, this has violated our community guidelines. And I had simply asked for a definition, and this definition is not only a semantic term, but it has a very specific legal meaning that was codified in 1948 by the UN through a convention around the prevention of genocide. And the fact that I could not get a specific definition from a generative AI system, and who decided that this would be inappropriate? Why is this somehow the boundary of that system? That is a really alarming question to me, especially because during that same time, we saw ChatGPT and other generative AI systems producing racist texts on demand. So if being asked to write some commentary in the style of white supremacist, it would gladly indulge. Or if I asked it, for example, show me a picture of a beautiful woman, it would do so, and it would recapitulate so many standards of objectification and beauty standards that we already see, but yet it would not give me a simple definition, which is a historically mediated term that has very specific legal ramifications in the way that the definitions of murder, homicide, manslaughter, those all are legal terms, have very specific applications, and I was very alarmed by the fact that I couldn't get that answer, but I could get other texts that felt also morally laden and biased.
What is the recourse in a situation like that? Is there an appeals process to, no, I really want a definition?
Not as far as I can tell. I mean, I think I could probably keep asking it and get banned, but
Use a different tool.
I don't know.
I would use Gemini instead of ChatGPT. Yeah.
Fair enough.
But I think this question of verification is a real one in computer science terms. Like, how do you tell that this thing is, your machine is giving you the right answer? How do you verify things? That's, I don't think they've figured that out yet. So, a lot of work to do there.
We have time for a couple more questions.
Following up on what you just said, Tom Reese from Religion News Service. When I started learning about computers way back in 1968, one of the first things I learned was garbage in, garbage out.
Yeah.
It seems to still be true. I mean, if ChatGPT consumes the entire internet, it's going to collect a lot of garbage. So the question comes in, who decides what is garbage and what is not?
Yeah.
And I don't think it's going to be the philosophy and theology department. It's going to be more the business school. Because the way America works today, it's libertarian capitalism. So if it can make money, it will go. I mean, the few regulations we have on technology, say in social media, protects social media from lawsuits. The things they print on Twitter, publish on Twitter, if they were published in the New York Times could be sued. But they are protected by law from being sued. So I'm not terribly optimistic. I think that we're going to see more garbage in and more garbage out until there's a disaster, and then, of course, then Congress comes in and tries to fix things like an oil spill. But please prove me wrong.
I'll give you a counterexample. It doesn't totally answer your pessimism here about the outlook, but it's a positive example. So I keep mentioning my friend Matthew Sanders. So he created an AI called Magisterium.ai that was trained with a small language model only on magisterial text, so only on things that are authoritative texts from the Catholic Church, including the Bible, Antiqua et Nova writings of the Pope, the dogmas, like trained just on what Catholics consider to be the truth, and so that's a verifiable set of information and limited to that scope, which is small. If you count up all the words written by all the Catholic theologians and popes, it's pretty small compared to the internet. But you can use it as a tool to plug into ChatGPT or Gemini, so that if a user is asking a question specifically about, okay, tell me what Antiqua et Nova is, or you're asking ChatGPT, it might not give you the right answer, but if it knows to make a call to Magisterium.ai to give the response, then it's much closer to the truth. So you can design things in a way that you try to avoid those types of errors, and that's in fact what we're going to be using Magisterium AI for on our campus, is plugging it into Gemini as an agent that gets automatically spawned when it recognizes you're asking a question something to do with the Catholic Church. But don't be so pessimistic about our theologians and philosophers either. They're helping us think this through. If we didn't have them, if all we had was physicists like myself, I think we'd be in big trouble. So I need the philosophers and theologians.
And Haley, do you see optimism anywhere?
I think it can be hard. I'm not a techno-pessimist. I'm also not a techno-optimist. I identify as a pragmatist, both philosophically and in relationship to AI and technology today. But New York State is not on track to meet its climate goals, largely in part due to crypto and AI data centers. So I think the tax on the land, the moral issues at stake, it makes it hard to see a way forward. But I believe that we have to be hopeful. And I think that to also address that last question, RAG models or models where AI is trained on focusing on a much smaller data set and really focusing on the particulars, then we can do amazing things with it. I mean, as a researcher, to be able to focus on one thinker's entire corpus and have it point me in the right direction for something I'm looking for, an answer I'm looking for specifically. That wouldn't necessarily replace the role of critical thinking and the role of the scholar, but I think it can be used certainly for good, and it's about the application, and it's about, I think, political and moral pressure on our institutions to demand applications of AI that support human life and flourishing, and human life and flourishing that is broadly imagined, that is not just of the powerful.
Well, Haley and Aaron, thank you so much for talking with me today, and thank you for your questions as well.
Okay.
We actually had time for one more question.
Oh, okay.
This clock says I have 8 seconds left. That's not enough time for a question.
Jason's like, I'm hungry.
NPR
I'm
clock,
done.
Jason. That's
Jason's
definitely not the
hangry.
NPR clock. We can do one more if we want, if there's a
Yes,
burning
please.
question.
Okay.
You'll
They
get
told
fed,
me to
Jason.
follow that clock, so I'm following
promise.
that clock.
Again, not an NPR clock.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Ekemini Uwan, public theologian and co-host of Truth Table podcast. I have a question, and I didn't hear it surface in the conversation, but I may have missed it. I'm curious about just the practical implications of AI on a host of areas. The environmental impact, the amount of water generative AI uses, the data centers that are being pushed into communities, one in PG County, that we've been fighting against in Maryland, which is a predominantly black, wealthy black suburb in Maryland, and other places, not just there, but other places, in the ways in which that is increasing our electricity bill, sucking up our water as well, but also the negative effects of chatbots and, well, not even just negative, I mean, deadly impacts of teens dying by suicide because of interactions with AI chatbots and whatnot, and even the ways this regime has weaponized AI against the black community. Just now, DHS released a fake AI video of black boys threatening ICE, which was a lie and is a lie. So I'm curious about just the practical implications of the ways AI is being weaponized against black communities and communities of color, and the environmental impact of that.
I think you touched briefly on the environmental impacts, Haley, and that is certainly part of a moral hazard that needs to be taken into account when thinking it through. Also, it points me as an engineer and physicist towards an underlying problem with the current setup, the current way that these large language models are made, is that they're incredibly inefficient. I mean, that it requires so much energy and compute power to create these models tells me that and it's basically brute force, tells me there's a better way to do it. I think these data centers of the future, maybe they'll always be the same size, but they'll be thousands of times more efficient. So that's also, I think, put that to my computer scientists, like, make this thing way more efficient, because it kind of is not so great. I shouldn't have to build a nuclear reactor right next to my data center just so I can get the answer.
I think also, to refer back to Professor Glad's opening remarks, that there needs to be some way in which those effects of AI are untenable. And I don't currently see, in the setup of the way that corporations are functioning, that there are any consequences for AI. It's green lighted. The use of land, the way in which it's using water, as you said, air conditioning, and contributing to terrorism and anti-blackness. I mean, that's not being addressed, but it's also not being made untenable. And I think that goes back to the other question about not only autonomy, but moral agency and moral responsibility. And I think that because there's not a clear, not only legal, but moral framework to hold creators of AI accountable, we're not going to see that until that moral framework is developed. So thank you for that question.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Jason,
Thank you,
Dr.
everybody.
Dominguez, Haley. Thank you.
Thank you.